Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a world where your biggest worry isn't Wi-Fi speed or finding the perfect Netflix show, it's whether that rustling in the bushes wants to eat you for dinner. We're diving deep into 4 incredible stories that'll make you grateful for heated homes, grocery stores, and the fact that nobody expects you to forge your own dinner knife from scratch. Picture this. You wake up on a slab of cold stone, wrapped in what smells suspiciously like yesterday's mammoth, while something with very sharp teeth is having a lengthy discussion about territorial rights just outside your cave. Welcome to the Stone Age, where every morning is a survival horror movie, and you're the least prepared cast member. Then we'll journey to feudal Japan, where 47 masterless samurai spent over a year plotting the most patient revenge in history. A story so legendary that people still leave flowers at their graves 3 centuries later. We'll explore ancient Egypt, where cats weren't just pets, but living gods who could literally get you executed if you looked at them wrong. And finally, we'll meet Thomas Jefferson, the man who wrote "All men are created equal" while owning over 600 human beings. A contradiction so stunning it still makes historians uncomfortable at dinner parties. You probably wouldn't last a day in any of these worlds, but that's exactly what makes them fascinating. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always amazing to see who's joining us from around the world at 3 a.m. for some historical comfort food. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've survived the night, barely, and only because nothing hungry stumbled into your cave while you were snoring like a mammoth with sinus problems. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? You're in the Stone Age, and your bed is a rock. Not like a firm mattress kind of rock. We're talking about a literal slab of nature that's done absolutely nothing to accommodate your spine. If you're lucky, there's a layer of fur between you and hypothermia, probably from some unfortunate animal you didn't kill but are now wearing like you accomplished something. It still smells like regret and wet dog had a baby. You try to sit up, but your joints crack loud enough to wake a saber-toothed tiger. Or at least earn a disapproving grunt from the person squatting next to you, sharpening a bone knife and looking thoroughly done with your existence. The air is cold, not charming winter walk cold, but I can see my breath and possibly part of my soul leaving my body cold. There's no fire, just the smoldering remains of what might have once been warmth, now reduced to smoke, ash, and broken dreams. Outside, the sun hasn't even risen yet, probably because it doesn't want to witness what's about to happen to you. The tribe is already awake, moving around like this is totally normal. Like waking up before dawn to gather rocks and avoid death is a perfectly reasonable lifestyle choice. You, on the other hand, look like someone dropped a confused time traveler into a Bear Grylls episode and forgot to give them the handbook. Historians still argue whether early humans actually enjoyed better sleep than we do today, given their physical exhaustion and lack of artificial light. But one thing's certain, they didn't have memory foam. You have no idea what you're supposed to do, and frankly, neither does anyone else, but they're infinitely better at pretending. You stretch, bad idea. You're sore in places you didn't know existed. Your shoulder clicks like a rusty gate. Your back spasms like it's filing a formal complaint with management, and your hips issue what can only be described as a strongly worded letter of resignation. There's no breakfast waiting, no gentle conversation over coffee, no morning news to ease you into consciousness. Just the cold, brutal realization that if you don't immediately start doing something useful, anything useful, you might get left behind. Or worse, become a convenient source of protein after you inevitably expire from incompetence. And that's how your morning begins in humanity's greatest survival challenge. Waking up 30,000 years ago with the survival skills of a houseplant and the physical preparedness of someone whose biggest daily challenge is usually finding matching socks. The tribe members glance at you occasionally, not with malice, but with the kind of resigned patience usually reserved for watching a toddler try to put on shoes. They've seen your type before. The newcomer, who doesn't know flint from limestone, can't tell edible berries from nature's way of saying goodbye forever, and treats fire-making like it's some kind of mystical art form instead of basic Tuesday morning routine. You're hungry. Not just I could eat hungry, but the kind of hunger where your stomach starts having heated debates with itself, and none of them are friendly. You look around expecting maybe a handful of berries, or even a sad strip of dried meat. There's nothing. Breakfast in the Stone Age isn't a guaranteed daily ritual. It's a hypothetical, a hope, a whispered prayer to an uncaring sky god who may or may not be a large rock with a face someone carved during a fever dream. If you want to eat, you have to earn it. That means digging, scraping, scavenging, or sprinting after something faster than you, and hoping it's significantly dumber. Spoiler alert, it isn't. Everything you want to eat either has legs that work better than yours, or thorns that seem personally offended by your existence. And in both cases, they use these features aggressively against you. You watch as a wiry man gnaws on a root that looks like something you'd avoid touching, even with gloves. He offers you a piece, and it tastes like wet wood that lost a philosophical argument with disappointment. But it fills your mouth, and more importantly, it doesn't actively try to kill you. A rare win in this unforgiving world. Someone else holds up a dead bird like they just discovered gold. It's about the size of your hand, mostly feathers, and what appears to be nervous energy frozen in time. They start plucking it with the efficiency of someone who's done this approximately 1,000 times, which is comforting until you realize they're keeping the whole thing. Apparently catching food means you get to eat food. What a revolutionary concept. You consider foraging, because after all, how hard could it be to spot something edible? Very hard, it turns out. Every fruit looks either suspiciously bright, like nature's warning system, or aggressively bland, like it's given up on life entirely. You pluck something that looks vaguely like a plum, and a woman slaps it out of your hand before you can taste it. She doesn't say anything, just gives you a look that clearly communicates. I've seen people drop dead faster than you can say organic. Historians still argue whether our ancestors actually had better nutritional diversity than modern humans, given their seasonal eating patterns. But there's no debate about this. They knew which plants wanted to murder them. You don't, so you settle for chewing on a piece of old root and pretending it's enough. It isn't. Your stomach isn't fooled. It begins planning your betrayal, and you're permanently fasting if you're not extremely careful about your next moves. Archaeological evidence suggests that Stone Age humans spent roughly 60% of their waking hours on food-related activities, which suddenly makes your 2-minute microwave dinner seem like the height of civilization. You try to look helpful, which is adorable in its futility. The tribe is already busy with the serious business of not dying. Someone's sharpening a flint blade with the casual expertise of a neurosurgeon. Someone else is weaving sinew into something that might be a net, or a trap, or just a creative way to make you feel completely inadequate. You pick up a rock and stare at it thoughtfully. It stares back with equal intensity. Congratulations, you're having a meaningful relationship with igneous sediment. Tools aren't decorations here. They're the reason anyone still has teeth, fingernails, or a pulse. They cut, scrape, smash, dig, and occasionally get used to settle arguments about whose turn it is to chase the antelope. Unless you've spent years figuring out which stone breaks into useful blades and which one just breaks your thumb in 17 places, you're about as useful as a chocolate teapot in a volcano. You try to copy what the others are doing. A man smacks 2 stones together and produces a razor-sharp edge in 3 economical swings. You attempt the same technique. The rock splits unevenly and flings a shard directly into your face. You're bleeding now, but hey, you've successfully recreated the Stone Age equivalent of emergency surgery. A woman nearby is making cord from strips of hide with the fluid efficiency of someone who's been doing this since she could walk. You attempt the same process. The hide slips, coils like it has a personal vendetta against you, and somehow ties your fingers together. You've invented prehistoric handcuffs, which is something. No one explains anything because they don't need to. Tools are so essential, they're treated like breathing. Expected, obvious, and really noticeable when you're catastrophically bad at them. And you're monumentally, spectacularly bad at them. You sit down with your 2 rocks and attempt a new strategy, staring until inspiration strikes. It doesn't. What strikes is another flake of stone, right into your lap. You pretend it was intentional. No one buys it, but at least they're too polite to laugh out loud. Eventually, someone takes pity on you and hands you a half-finished scraper, not out of kindness, but because watching you fail is slowing down the entire operation. You nod gratefully and then hold it the wrong way immediately. They shake their head and return to work, probably wondering how your genetic line survived long enough to produce you. It's getting colder again, which is impressive considering you didn't think colder was still an option in this frozen wasteland. Your fingers are stiff, your nose has stopped issuing temperature updates, and your feet are starting to feel like someone else's problem entirely. You decide it's time to make fire. After all, how hard can it be? You've seen it done in movies, documentaries, and fever dreams. Step 1. Gather dry wood. You don't find dry wood. Everything's damp, stubborn, and covered in something that may or may not be alive and plotting against you. You pick the least suspicious bundle and hope for the best. Step 2. Friction. You rub sticks together with the determination of someone whose life depends on it, which it absolutely does. Nothing happens. You rub harder, still nothing. Eventually you create heat, then smoke, and then more smoke. It's just enough to burn your eyes and give you false hope before the wind shows up like nature's own personal bully and blows it all away. You keep going anyway. By now your hands are blistered, your arms ache like you've been arm wrestling bears, and your confidence has quietly left the camp without saying goodbye. You glance over. One of the elders has a fire going already. No ceremony, no drama, just a small perfect flame nestled in a pile of dry moss like it was born there. Meanwhile, your pile looks like it's been cursed by an ancient fire god who took your attempts personally. Historians still argue whether early humans discovered fire-making independently or learned it from natural wildfires, but there's no arguing with this. They were infinitely better at it than you are. Eventually, someone notices your pathetic situation. They walk over, silently take your kindling, rearrange it with the efficiency of a bored deity, and strike 2 rocks together with a flint edge. Sparks, smoke, flame, done. They hand it back to you without a word and walk away before you can express gratitude or beg them to teach you their dark magic. You stare at the fire now burning cheerfully in your pile, pretending it was your idea all along. No one believes you, including the fire, which seems to be mocking you with its warm, steady glow. Fire is everything here. Warmth, light, safety, cooked food, and the only reason predators haven't dragged you off into the night like a midnight snack. But it's not easy. It never was. Every flame is a battle against the elements, and you just lost 5 of them in a row before someone took pity on your frozen, incompetent existence. Archaeological findings show that controlled fire use dates back nearly 2 million years, making it one of humanity's oldest technologies, and somehow, you're still terrible at it. You're thirsty now? Deep. My mouth feels like I've been chewing sand for entertainment. Thirsty. The kind of thirsty that makes you consider licking moss or chewing bark just to feel something wet. Luckily, there's a stream nearby. You stumble toward it like a man possessed. Finally, something straightforward and uncomplicated. You kneel, cup your hands, and scoop up a glorious handful of crystal clear water. You drink, and then you pause. That water had a taste. Not a flavor, but a message. It whispered something metallic and vaguely threatening. A few seconds later, your stomach replies with a gurgle that sounds like it's filing a formal complaint with management. Here's the thing about Stone Age water. It's not clean, filtered, or lovingly piped from mountain springs through advanced purification systems. It's wild, communal soup. Animals drink from it, people bathe in it, sometimes things die in it, and sometimes people drink from it after things die in it. There's no quality control department, no health inspectors, just risk management and prayer. You look around desperately for signs, any signs, that this water won't end your adventure prematurely. No one else is drinking, which might be a clue worth paying attention to. One of the elders is boiling something over a fire. Smart approach that you definitely didn't consider before drinking straight from nature's roulette wheel. A small child walks by and hands you a hollowed-out gourd of water. It's warm, smells faintly like earth and regret, and still looks infinitely safer than whatever just settled in your lower intestine. But there's no other option. You're in the middle of a society that hasn't discovered plumbing, filtration, or even consistent advice on which puddles won't ruin your entire week. Thirst is constant here, and water is everywhere, just inconveniently weaponized against your digestive system. You hear a story, half whispered around the fire, about a man who drank from the wrong bend in the river and didn't make it to morning. You nod solemnly, trying to commit this wisdom to memory, while also pretending you didn't just make the exact same mistake. Now, it's a waiting game. Will you hydrate successfully and feel refreshed, or are you about to spend the next 12 hours regretting every decision your tongue has ever made? Modern water treatment removes over 99% of harmful bacteria, but Stone Age water treatment consisted primarily of hope and occasionally boiling things, if you remembered. You've decided to join the hunt. Bold, brave, and almost certainly doomed. You're handed a spear that's heavy, uneven, and smells suspiciously like the last thing it was jammed into. Probably something with tusks and anger management issues. The others check their gear with the casual efficiency of people heading out to pick up groceries, if groceries actively tried to impale you and had been known to hold grudges. You follow the group into the woods. The air is quiet, too quiet. You assume this is good, but it's not. The silence means every animal within a considerable radius knows you're here and has decided it doesn't want to participate in today's menu planning. Eventually, someone spots something. A wild boar. It's massive, looks like it bench presses fallen logs for entertainment, and has the general demeanor of something that's never lost an argument. You raise your spear with hands that are shaking like autumn leaves in a hurricane. Your confidence is even less stable. The boar looks up, makes direct eye contact, and you freeze like a deer in headlights. The boar doesn't freeze. It charges with the enthusiasm of something that clearly enjoys these kinds of social interactions. You run. That's it. That's your entire strategy. You sprint through the trees, trip over a root that was obviously placed there by enemies, and eat dirt. Not metaphorically, actual dirt. It tastes about as inspiring as your hunting performance. Behind you, the real hunters are moving with precision that makes your panic look even more embarrassing. One darts left, another flanks from the side. Spears fly with accuracy you couldn't achieve if you practiced for decades. The boar goes down, the tribe cheers, and you're still on the ground, reevaluating your entire existence and wondering if there's a career counselor available in the Paleolithic era. Historians still argue whether early human hunting was primarily cooperative or opportunistic, but there's no debate about this. It wasn't cinematic, and you're definitely not the protagonist. They drag the carcass back to camp. It takes 4 people, and sounds that suggest manual labor was significantly more manual before the invention of wheels, pulleys, and basic mechanical advantage. You limp behind them, trying to look like you contributed meaningfully to this effort. You didn't, and everyone knows it, including the dead boar, which seems to be judging you posthumously. Back at the fire, they butcher the animal with stone knives and practiced hands that make surgery look clumsy. You get handed a strip of raw meat and chew it like someone trying to decode a particularly challenging riddle. It's chewy, slightly warm, and emotionally complex. This was supposed to be your moment, your heroic breakthrough into Stone Age competence. Instead, the truth becomes abundantly clear. In this world, hunting isn't a romantic adventure. It's exhausting, dangerous, and most of the time you don't get the animal. The animal gets you, or at least your dignity, and several layers of skin from that impromptu meeting with the forest floor. After almost getting trampled to death by an overgrown pork missile with anger issues, you decide to try something safer. Plants. How hard could foraging be? You've seen leaves, you've even touched a mushroom once. You're basically a botanical expert. You head out with a small woven pouch and boundless optimism. 2 things that historically get people killed within minutes in environments like this. You find something that looks promising, a berry bush. The berries are small, shiny, and vividly colored, which is either a sign of delicious nutrition or nature's equivalent of a blaring biological warning siren saying, Do not eat under any circumstances. You grab one, and just as you're about to pop it into your mouth like some kind of prehistoric taste tester, a nearby woman swats your hand away like she's literally saving your life. Which, to be fair, she probably is. No one explains anything because they don't have time for your educational needs. You're supposed to know what's edible and what's a one-way ticket to the afterlife. And if you don't, well, the tribe gets one more cautionary tale to tell around the fire. You move on, dig up a few tubers, and try to act like you know what you're doing with them. You even sniff a mushroom with scholarly curiosity before tossing it away, remembering that fungi in this world are less delightful side dish and more hallucinate into the void before expiring under a fern. A man shows you something that looks like a shriveled brown carrot crossed with tree bark. He nods approvingly. You nod back as if you've known this plant personally for years, maybe went to school together. You chew a piece. It tastes like soil mixed with disappointment and a hint of, why did I think this was a good idea? But you're not dead yet, which qualifies as a resounding success in Stone Age nutritional science. The truth is, plants are the real gatekeepers of survival. They don't run, they don't bite, they don't charge at you with murderous intent. They just sit there quietly, waiting for you to make a mistake. One bite of the wrong leaf and suddenly you're in a race between violent vomiting and your nervous system shutting down like an overloaded computer. Even the edible ones are work. Some roots need boiling, some leaves need drying, some seeds will absolutely murder you if you forget to roast them first. Historians still argue whether Paleolithic humans had better overall nutrition than modern populations due to dietary diversity. But one thing's certain, they knew which plants were trying to kill them, and you definitely don't. There are no shortcuts in this world, only symptoms. By the time you return to camp, you've gathered 2 vaguely safe tubers, a few edible flowers that taste like green disappointment, and a newfound respect for herbal knowledge you absolutely do not possess. Modern foraging guides contain thousands of pages of detailed information with photographs, descriptions, and safety warnings. Stone Age foraging education consisted of, don't eat that or you'll die, and hoping you remembered which plants got you the lecture. Your outfit deserves special mention. It consists of animal hides that were scraped clean with rocks, dried over smoke, and stitched together with sinew, using a technique best described as functional but vaguely insulting to the concept of tailoring. It doesn't fit anywhere it should, fits terribly where it shouldn't, and smells like something that was recently alive and still might be holding a grudge about the whole situation. There are no sleeves, just holes where your arms are expected to exit the garment. The hide itself is stiff in places that make movement awkward, loose in places that make you question physics, and generally designed by someone whose only fashion goal was, don't freeze to death today. Anything else is luxury. You tug at the edges trying to adjust it. Bad idea. The seams, made of dried sinew, respond by digging deeper into your skin like they're personally offended by your attempts at comfort. Now you're chafing, which is just another delightful addition to your growing list of Stone Age inconveniences. Nearby, a woman is softening a new hide by chewing it. Yes, chewing it like gum, except it's leather, and this is considered completely normal methodology. You briefly wonder how desperate someone had to be to discover that teeth were a viable tailoring tool. Then remember your current situation and realize desperation makes innovators of everyone. You try to look dignified in your fur ensemble, but it's challenging when your outfit flaps weird when you move, makes suspicious crackling sounds when you sit, and seems to have been designed by someone who thought weather protection was a luxury concept. Your boots are 2 mismatched scraps tied together with strips of gut, and your inner thighs are now engaged in territorial warfare with your outer thighs over something as basic as walking without pain. Then there's the temperature situation. Somehow your hide outfit manages to be too warm and too cold simultaneously, like it's achieved some kind of thermodynamic impossibility. The fur traps heat around your torso, making you sweat like you're in a sauna, while your limbs dangle freely in the wind like sacrificial offerings to the frost gods. And don't even think about rain. Hides get wet, wet hides get heavy, and suddenly you're walking around wrapped in a soggy animal sponge that slowly reanimates as it drips down your back with all the charm of a mobile swamp. Meanwhile, the rest of the tribe looks perfectly comfortable in their handmade gear. Their clothes move with them. Yours moves against you, like it resents being worn by someone this incompetent. You think the tribe likes you, which is adorable in its optimism. You've been here maybe 2 days, you haven't actively endangered anyone yet, and you're trying your best, which in Stone Age terms still ranks just below dead weight and just above animal bait. Nobody says it out loud, of course. That would require effort they can't spare. But the signs are there, clear as cave paintings. When the group sits around the fire, they sit slightly closer to each other, leaving you a generous 4-foot buffer zone like you're contagious. Which, considering you drank from that questionable stream, might actually be medically accurate at this point. Social status here is based on one simple metric: usefulness. Can you hunt? Can you gather food that won't kill everyone? Can you not scream when insects crawl up your leg during the night? No? Then congratulations. You're not part of the inner circle. You're more of a temporary guest, a very flammable one. You try to contribute enthusiastically. You offer a route, but it's the wrong route. You attempt to help tan a hide, but you poke a hole straight through it with your characteristic grace. Someone hands you a bundle of sticks and gestures vaguely toward the fire. You stand there holding them like you're about to invent performance art, completely baffled by what seems like a simple request. They stop asking you to help, which is somehow worse than being given impossible tasks. At one point, a child offers you a sharp rock. You assume it's a gift. It isn't. It's a test of basic competency. You fail it spectacularly by holding the blade upside down and bleeding onto your own foot, because apparently even gravity is working against you in this time period. No one reacts to your mishap, and that's the worst part. No one mocks you, no one gets angry. They just move on like weather, like nature, like you're not worth getting emotional about yet. You overhear someone grunt in your direction. It's a tone you don't understand intellectually, but you feel it in your bones. Not threatening, not friendly, just observational. The same way someone might comment on a log that's not burning properly. You are that log, and you're starting to wonder if the wolves outside might actually be a more forgiving audience than your current roommates. There's no lantern, no torch, no warm glow from a bedside table lamp to ease the transition into evening. The sun drops behind the horizon like a guillotine, and just like that, the world turns black. Not dim, not cozy. Black, with the finality of a power outage in a city that forgot to pay its electric bill. The fire crackles, casting a flickering circle of light that somehow makes everything just visible enough to be infinitely more terrifying than complete darkness. Trees rustle in the distance, with sounds that definitely aren't wind. Something howls. It's either a wolf or something that eats wolves for appetizers, and either way, it knows exactly where you are and has been waiting patiently for you to fall asleep so it can discuss dinner plans. You scoot closer to the fire, but no one joins you in your desperate huddle for warmth and psychological comfort. Most of the tribe is already curled up together in a pile of hides, forming a warm collective mass of mutual trust and shared body heat that looks incredibly appealing. You're not invited to this Stone Age slumber party. You're the person who sneezed during the hunting expedition and scared off a deer. You get the cold side of the cave, the spot where the wind has direct access to your spine, and the privilege of wondering if that sound outside is a branch or something with teeth conducting reconnaissance. Sleep doesn't come easily when every sound outside the fire's protective glow seems to have an agenda. A twig snaps. You sit up like a meerkat on high alert. A branch creaks. You stop breathing entirely and pray to gods whose names you don't know, but figure they'll understand the general concept of, please don't let me become a midnight snack. Something snorts, or maybe exhales from behind the rock wall, and you make peace with deities you're not even sure exist. Even the stars look like they're judging your life choices. Beautiful? Yes. Useful for navigation? Probably. But you can't eat them, can't wear them, and they won't scare off whatever just moved near the cave entrance with the confidence of something that belongs here more than you do. You close your eyes, then open them again almost immediately. Your brain, ever helpful, reminds you that you're wrapped in a damp fur coat, lying on an uneven slab of earth where, surrounded by people who may or may not notice if you get dragged away in the night by something hungry. Historians still argue whether Stone Age humans actually slept better due to natural circadian rhythms and physical exhaustion. But there's no debating this. They slept with one eye open and both ears tuned to the frequency of approaching danger. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If something does decide you look tasty tonight, it won't be out of malice or personal vendetta. It'll be pure efficiency. You're slow, you're weak, and judging by your earlier performance with that root, you probably smell like panic mixed with poor decision-making. You wake up sore, stiff, and somehow colder than when you fell asleep, which shouldn't be physically possible, but Stone Age physics apparently enjoy discovering new forms of suffering. Your fur wrap has shifted during the night, offering little more than emotional support and false advertising. Your ankle feels like it lost a fight with a particularly vindictive rock, and there's a new bite mark on your arm. Could be a bug, could be a rodent. Honestly, you're just grateful something found you useful enough to snack on. Outside the cave, the tribe is already up again. You don't know when these people sleep. Maybe they don't. Maybe exhaustion is just something they wrestle into submission, like everything else in their lives. You hobble toward the fire pit, hoping for residual warmth, but there isn't any. The ashes are cold. The fire died sometime during the night in what was apparently a group decision that didn't involve consulting you or your rapidly numbing extremities. A group of people is already organizing the day's activities with the efficiency of a military operation. Someone's reinforcing the shelter wall with bones. Another person is gutting something with the terrifying ease of someone who's never questioned where food comes from. You try to help again and manage to trip over a child's toy, which is literally just a small rock with a face carved into it. The child stares at you like you've insulted their ancestors, which you probably have. No one tells you what to do because that's not how survival works in this unforgiving world. You're expected to know, and if you don't know, you're expected to figure it out without asking questions like, is this sharp thing supposed to be covered in blood already? Or, why does everyone keep looking at me like I'm tomorrow's emergency protein source? At first you think it's raining, but it isn't. It's starting to rain, which is infinitely worse, because now you know the full downpour is coming, and you're about as prepared for it as a chocolate umbrella. Even the people who've lived here their entire lives glance up at the darkening sky and frown like the weather just told an inappropriate joke at a funeral. You shuffle over to the edge of what generously passes for shelter. And by shelter, we mean some branches tied together with gut strings and the desperate hope that trees understand basic engineering principles. Spoiler alert, they don't. The wind picks up, cutting through your hide clothing like you're wearing a damp napkin with delusions of grandeur. Your boots, which are just scraps of animal skin tied around your feet with optimism, begin soaking through immediately. Your toes squish with each step, and you pretend not to notice while internally composing your resignation letter to the concept of dry feet. The rain begins in earnest. Cold, fat drops that feel less like precipitation and more like nature's way of expressing its disappointment in your life choices. Everything becomes slick instantly. The fire sputters like it's personally offended by moisture. The walls creak ominously, and the smell of wet fur fills the air like an apology nobody wants to hear. You duck into the cave, hoping for relief. It's marginally better, which is like saying a hurricane is marginally better than a tornado. The roof leaks in 3 strategic locations, and the floor has transformed into mud with the enthusiasm of someone discovering their true calling in life. You watch a centipede confidently stroll across your sleeping area. It seems infinitely more prepared for this lifestyle than you are, and honestly, you're starting to consider asking it for survival tips. Archaeological evidence shows that prehistoric humans were remarkably adaptable to weather changes, developing sophisticated strategies for staying dry and warm. You, however, have developed a sophisticated strategy for getting wetter and colder while making sad whimpering sounds that attract pity from small children. The others are already adjusting with practiced efficiency. Someone's moving firewood inside before it gets soaked. Others are hanging hides to dry near what's left of the smoke. You try to help and knock over a stack of carefully arranged tools, creating a loud clatter that echoes through the cave like an announcement of your continued incompetence. The stairs that follow could freeze water at room temperature. You are now both wet and in the way, which is somehow an achievement in disappointment that even you didn't think was possible. Later, someone tosses you a half-dry pelt to wear over your increasingly useless outfit. You drape it around yourself like a soggy emperor trying to maintain dignity while everything falls apart, and attempt not to look too grateful for this small mercy. It helps. Not much, but enough to remind you that kindness exists even in places where survival is a full-time job with no vacation days. You sit down carefully, dripping quietly into a puddle of your own making, while the storm howls outside like it has a personal vendetta against your comfort. Historians still argue whether climate change affected Stone Age populations more dramatically than previously thought, but there's no debate about this. Weather was personal, immediate, and utterly indifferent to your plans, hopes, or strongly worded complaints about accommodation standards. Modern humans have mostly forgotten what it feels like to be truly at the mercy of the elements, but you're getting a crash course in meteorological humility. The rain isn't just weather, it's a reminder that nature doesn't care about your schedule, your comfort, or your deeply held belief that you deserve to be dry. It rains because it rains, and you deal with it because the alternative is becoming a very wet, very cold, very temporary part of the landscape. It starts with a cough. Nothing dramatic, just a little scratch in your throat that you try to ignore by clearing it discreetly. By mid-morning, you're wheezing like a dying accordion, and your nose has decided to stage a full-scale revolt against the concept of breathing. Your eyes are watering, your skin feels warm in that special way that whispers infection incoming, and you've officially entered the Stone Age healthcare system. Congratulations. There's no customer service desk to complain to. You announce your deteriorating condition to exactly no one, because no one is going to do anything about it, except maybe move you further downwind so you don't contaminate the actually useful members of society. You have entered the medical care phase of prehistoric life, which consists primarily of hope, prayer, and chewing whatever plants the tribal healer thinks might help, assuming they don't accidentally poison you in the process. An elder takes one look at your pathetic, fevering form, grunts with the resignation of someone who's seen this movie before, and hands you a wad of crushed leaves. You chew them obediently. They taste like moldy spinach that's been marinated in old sweat and regret. You nod solemnly, as if this herbal medicine is clearly helping, when in reality it's doing absolutely nothing except making your mouth taste like a compost pile. Had an argument with disappointment. Your fever worsens with the enthusiasm of something that's found its calling in life. Someone suggests a steam treatment, which sounds promising, until you discover it involves sitting in a hole next to heated rocks while they pour water over them. You cough, sweat profusely, and contemplate the philosophical implications of mortality. It's like a sauna designed by someone who's only ever heard saunas described by people having fever dreams. At some point, a woman with exactly 3 teeth and a permanent scowl that could curdle milk smears a mixture of mud, herbs, and what you strongly suspect is animal fat onto your chest. This is apparently for drawing out the spirits, which either means evil spirits of illness or just spirits in general. The translation is unclear, and you're too sick to request clarification. Pain relief in this era consists of getting a stick to bite on and receiving a knowing look from the tribal healer that could mean anything from "you'll be fine" to "I'll tell your story to future generations as a cautionary tale." The cure for any ailment, it seems, is either time, luck, or simply not dying before whatever's wrong with you gets bored and moves on to someone else. Historians still argue whether Stone Age humans had stronger immune systems due to constant exposure to pathogens, but there's no argument about their medical philosophy. If you survive, the treatment worked, and if you don't, well, at least you tried the stick-biting method. You attempt to sleep off your illness, but your dreams are strange and unsettling. In one, you're being chased by a squirrel the size of a bison. In another, your spear is having a philosophical discussion about existentialism. You wake up gasping in a puddle of your own sweat and leaf fragments, which is either a sign of recovery or the beginning of a very different kind of journey. Modern medicine would have you diagnosed, medicated, and complaining about copays within hours. Stone Age medicine has you chewing mystery plants and hoping your immune system remembers its job description. By the end of the day, you're not better, but you're not notably worse either, which in prehistoric terms means you might survive long enough to make more embarrassing mistakes tomorrow. Or you might just be entering phase 2 of whatever microscopic warfare is currently being waged inside your respiratory system. You accidentally bump into someone today. Not hard, just a gentle shoulder graze while attempting to navigate toward the fire without falling over your own feet. They look at you like you just challenged them to a duel to the death at dawn. You stammer an apology through your congested sinuses, but they don't answer. They simply stand up, square their shoulders, and stare at you until your soul attempts to leave your body through your increasingly unreliable nasal passages. It turns out conflict resolution in the Stone Age is not based on open dialogue, active listening, or mediated discussions about feelings and boundaries. It's more of a let's see who survives this disagreement kind of cultural approach, with emphasis on the surviving part. There's no concept of de-escalation. No one is diffusing tension with calming voices or gentle reminders that we're all part of the same struggling survival team. Instead, someone casually sharpens a stick nearby, not necessarily because of your conflict, just as a general lifestyle choice, but the message is crystal clear. Don't push your luck. Sneezy. Disputes here are settled through meaningful stares, loaded silences, or sudden acts of deeply personal violence that make modern road rage look like a polite disagreement about parking spaces. If things escalate beyond dirty looks, there are options available. A fight, an elaborate insult ritual involving the questioning of each other's ancestry, or just straight-up banishment into the woods where the leopards are always hiring new menu items. You try to smooth things over by offering a piece of smoked fish, which seems like a reasonable peace offering until you realize the fish is overcooked, and now you've somehow managed to offend someone's grandmother who invented that particular recipe 8 generations ago. Culinary criticism, apparently, is taken very personally when food is this scarce, and every meal represents hours of life-threatening effort. Eventually, a tribal elder mutters something under their breath and breaks a small stick in half with deliberate ceremony. This is clearly symbolic of something important, though you have no idea what. Maybe they're representing your chances of social redemption, or possibly just demonstrating what they'd like to do to your spine if you cause more problems. The interpretation is open to scholarly debate, but the message feels universally clear. The man you bumped into grunts once, gives you a final look that could freeze water at room temperature, and walks away with the dignity of someone who has chosen not to murder you today, purely out of convenience rather than mercy. Later, someone pats you on the back, either in reassurance that you're not about to be exiled, or to check how many ribs you still have and whether they're worth preserving for future use. What you've learned is that maintaining peace in the Stone Age takes genuine diplomatic skill that would impress modern United Nations mediators. A wrong glance, an unfair share of meat, or breathing too loudly during communal sleep time can spark consequences you can't talk your way out of with apologies and explanations about cultural misunderstandings. Historians still argue whether prehistoric societies were more or less violent than agricultural civilizations. But there's no debate about this. There's no agree to disagree philosophy here. There's just agree, or dig a hole for yourself in the woods and hope the bears aren't hungry today. In modern times, you'd leave a 1-star review on social media and feel vindicated. Here, bad reviews come in the form of sharp objects and permanent relocation to locations with significantly worse amenities than your current cave. Well, you did it, sort of. You've made it through several Stone Age days, though made it might be stretching the definition like taffy. You're alive, yes, but not exactly thriving in any measurable way. Your clothes are permanently damp, Your pride is completely shredded, your stomach hasn't forgiven you for the stream incident, and every muscle in your body has filed formal complaints with management about working conditions. But technically, you're still breathing, which in this unforgiving environment qualifies as a resounding success worthy of celebration. The tribe hasn't exiled you yet, which may be an oversight on their part, or maybe they've silently agreed that you're too entertaining to get rid of. After all, watching you attempt to climb that tree for berries and instead discover a wasp nest did provide the entire group with 6 solid minutes of bonding as they laughed at your expense. As night falls again, you sit near the fire, not close enough to be presumptuous, but closer than yesterday, which represents measurable social progress in Stone Age terms. You're beginning to understand the rhythm of this world, the quiet mornings where every sound could mean danger, the harsh sun that offers warmth but no mercy, the constant need to earn everything from food to shelter to basic respect with hands that weren't trained for any of this. No one has explained anything to you because they never do. This isn't a world of instruction manuals or helpful tutorials. It's a world of observation, imitation, and failing repeatedly until failure teaches you what survival textbooks never could. Someone hands you a strip of roasted meat without ceremony. You nod in thanks, and it's tough, salty, and has a hint of fur that suggests the butchering process was more practical than precise. You chew it like it's your last meal, which it very well might be, and appreciate every stringy, barely edible bite because you earned it simply by not dying today. You still don't belong here. Not really. Your brain keeps trying to apply logic from another time, one with microwaves and matching socks and reasonable expectations about personal hygiene. But slowly, painfully, like learning a language through total immersion, it's starting to adapt to this harsh reality. You now know that fire doesn't make itself through good intentions, water is rarely a gift from nature, and roots are actively trying to kill you with the determination of tiny vegetable assassins. The tribe chats quietly in their own language, one that's more gesture and meaningful expression than actual words. You catch none of it, but you nod anyway because it seems polite and you're desperate for any social interaction that doesn't involve someone questioning your right to exist. You lie down on your patch of cold earth, wrapped in furs that smell like every animal in the forest had a disagreement and decided to settle it on your bedding. Your body hurts in places you didn't know could hurt. Your dignity has been thoroughly destroyed and possibly recycled into compost, but for now, nothing is actively biting you. In the Stone Age, that's about as good as it gets. A victory measured not in comfort or convenience, but in the simple fact that you've survived another day in humanity's greatest endurance test. You wouldn't last a week here under normal circumstances. Technically, you've barely lasted these few days, but let's not push our luck with extended stays. The people who thrived in this era weren't just tough, they were connected to their environment in ways that modern humans have completely forgotten. They read weather patterns like we read text messages, understood animal behavior like we understand traffic lights, and treated every day like the survival examination it actually was. But now, as you drift towards sleep on your stone bed with the sounds of the wild world settling around you, you've gained something unexpected. Perspective. Every complaint about Wi-Fi speed, every frustration with food delivery times, every annoyance about room temperature suddenly seems beautifully, ridiculously trivial. Your ancestors lived like this for thousands of years, and somehow, miraculously, they survived long enough to create you. The fire crackles lower, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls that have watched countless humans struggle, adapt, and endure. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities to embarrass yourself, and new chances to appreciate just how extraordinary ordinary life has become. But tonight, wrapped in fur and humility, you understand something profound about human resilience. We've always been tougher than we think, even when we think we're not tough at all. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the firelight, the Stone Age continues its ancient rhythm, indifferent to your struggles but somehow proud that you tried. You close your eyes, listening to the eternal sounds of wind and wild things, and drift toward dreams where survival isn't a daily negotiation with death, but simply the baseline expectation of being alive. It began with silence and formality, two things that in Edo period Japan were never as harmless as they seemed. The year was 1701, and Lord Asano Naganori of Akko, a young daimyo from western Japan, had been summoned to the shogun's palace in Edo to perform a delicate duty, receive and entertain envoys from the emperor in Kyoto. This was no casual social gathering. The court demanded precision, protocol was everything, and watching over these ceremonies was a man named Kira Yoshinaka. Kira was a high-ranking court official, master of rituals, and unofficially infamous for expecting bribes from anyone who wanted their ceremonial duties to go smoothly. Lord Asano, however, was not one to play those particular games. He came from a proud samurai lineage where honor wasn't a bargaining chip to be traded for convenience, and perhaps to his own tragic detriment, he had a face that couldn't pretend to smile when his soul was frowning. Kira noticed this resistance immediately, and Kira resented it with the passion of someone whose entire livelihood depended on other people's willingness to pay for his expertise. Over the days that followed, Kira began needling Asano with insults. Quiet jabs, sharp corrections about protocol, petty humiliations, delivered with the surgical precision of someone who knew exactly how to wound a proud man's dignity. The courtly halls of Edo Castle echoed with whispers as Kira called Asano a country bumpkin, mocked his manners, made him wait outside rooms he was supposed to be hosting, and generally treated him like an ignorant peasant who had wandered into polite society by mistake. The tension built quietly and painfully, like pressure beneath lacquered wood that looks beautiful until it suddenly splinters. And then, on the 21st day of the third month in the year 1701, it snapped with the finality of a sword being drawn. In a hallway of Edo Castle, Asano drew his short sword and attacked Kira. His blade grazed the older man's face and shoulder, an insult rather than a killing blow, but in the rigid world of Tokugawa Japan, to draw a weapon inside the shogun's palace was unforgivable, no matter the provocation or justification. Kira survived with minor wounds and maximum indignation. Asano was immediately arrested, and within hours the shogunate passed judgment with the swift efficiency of a government that couldn't afford to appear weak. No investigation, no consideration of circumstances, no second chances. Lord Asano was ordered to commit seppuku, ritual suicide, by sunset. His lands were confiscated, his retainers were cast out like autumn leaves, his family was dishonored, and most cruelly of all, Kira remained untouched, unpunished, victorious. But the story didn't end with Asano's death, though it should have, according to every law and custom of the time. Among Asano's now masterless samurai, his Ronin, was a man named Oishi Kuranosuke. And while the world moved on and forgot about one dead lord's moment of rage, Oishi began to plan. Quietly, patiently, with the methodical precision of someone who understood that revenge is a dish best served cold, calculated, and absolutely devastating. Historians still argue whether the events that followed represent the highest ideals of Bushido or a dangerous rejection of legal authority. But there's no debate about this. What happened next would become legend, inspire countless stories, and raise questions about loyalty, justice, and honor that Japan still wrestles with today. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about something deeper, something older, a test of what it truly meant to be samurai when the system itself had failed to deliver justice. The death of Lord Asano should have marked the end of this story. His house was abolished, his men disbanded, and the shogun had made it crystal clear that there would be no vendetta, no further violence, no challenging of the official verdict. Kira remained safe in his estate under the protection of law and custom, while justice had been rendered swift, cold, and apparently final. But outside the shogun's palace, the ancient code of the samurai told a very different story about duty, loyalty, and what happens when legal justice fails to satisfy moral justice. Oishi Kuranosuke, chief retainer of the fallen Asano, didn't weep dramatically or shout threats of vengeance like characters in kabuki plays. He bowed his head respectfully, dispersed the samurai of Akko with appropriate ceremony, and obeyed the shogunal decree with every appearance of complete submission. Outwardly, he submitted to authority like a model subject. Inwardly, he began to wait with the patience of someone planning something that would require perfect timing and flawless execution. The Ronin scattered like seeds on the wind. Some returned to their families to take up farming or trade. Others became merchants, monks, even beggars, disappearing into the anonymous masses of Edo period society. The world believed they had moved on, that their loyalty had died with their master, that they had accepted their fate and found new purposes in life. But beneath the surface of this apparent dissolution, a plan was coiling tighter and more dangerous with each passing month. Oishi knew that the shogunate was watching carefully for any sign of conspiracy or revenge plotting. Any hint of organized resistance would mean immediate arrest, torture, and execution before any plan could be implemented. So Oishi played the part of a broken man with the skill of a master actor. He moved to Kyoto, drank openly in the streets like a man drowning his sorrows, gambled in public with the recklessness of someone who no longer cared about money, and took up with courtesans in a display of dissolution that scandalized anyone who had known him as a responsible retainer. For over a year, he projected the perfect image of a man broken by disgrace, disheveled, drunk, dishonored, the textbook portrait of a samurai who had lost his way and his dignity along with his master. Meanwhile, his fellow Ronin were doing the exact opposite in secret corners of tea houses and hidden shrine meetings. They stayed in careful touch through coded letters, studied Kira's movements with the dedication of scholars, and measured every detail of his heavily fortified Edo mansion. They learned the guard schedules, mapped the layout with architectural precision, studied the rhythm of the household, and noted every entrance, exit, and vulnerability. Kira, for his part, gradually relaxed his vigilance as months passed without incident. He had powerful friends in high places, wealth, influence, and a scar that was healing nicely. His enemies had seemingly vanished into poverty and irrelevance. What more could a scattered band of masterless samurai possibly do to someone under the shogun's protection? This was exactly what Oishi wanted him to think, because behind the sake-stained robes and slurred words was a mind sharper than any blade, planning not just a killing, but a statement that would speak to all of Japan. He wasn't simply plotting murder. He was crafting a demonstration that would show the world that Bushido, the true way of the warrior, was not dead, not corrupted by politics, not compromised by convenience. Historians still argue whether Oishi's year of apparent debauchery was genuine psychological collapse or masterful deception, but the result was undeniable. By the time snow began to fall over Edo in late 1702, Kira had forgotten to be afraid, and that forgetting would prove to be the last mistake of his long and profitable life. By the time snow began to fall over Edo in late 1702, 47 Ronin had made their final decision. No more waiting, no more watching, no more pretending to be anything other than what they truly were. The time for vengeance had arrived with the inevitability of winter itself. Oishi Kuranosuke gathered his scattered brothers in arms through careful messages that traveled like whispers through the network they had maintained for nearly 2 years. Some traveled for days to reach Edo, others had never truly left the city, but one by one they reassembled, not as wandering masterless men scraping together a living, but as samurai once more. They came together not for pay, not for the promise of restored honor or material reward, but for duty of the purest kind, the type that lives on after death and transcends legal boundaries. The plan they had developed was precise beyond anything Hollywood could imagine. Each man had a specific role. This wasn't a brawl or a crime of passion. It was a performance where every detail mattered, and every movement had been rehearsed in their minds countless times. They forged new weapons in secret, silent and fast, designed for efficiency rather than display. They crafted winter armor light enough to scale walls, but thick enough to deflect a desperate strike from a terrified guard. They even built elaborate cover stories, including a fake fire brigade complete with authentic uniforms, just in case anyone questioned why a group of men was marching through the snowy streets of Edo at 2 in the morning with obvious military coordination. Kira's mansion was essentially a fortress. High walls, dozens of guards, multiple gates, and layers of security that had been designed by people who understood that wealth makes enemies. But this fortress had been studied with the obsessive attention to detail that only comes from having over a year to plan and nothing to lose. The layout was memorized down to individual floorboards, the routines were predictable as clockwork, and the servants had grown complacent in the way that people do when danger becomes theoretical rather than immediate. Most importantly, they had grown lazy because the Ronin were supposed to be gone, broken, defeated. Oishi made sure his own family was protected before the attack. He divorced his wife and sent her and their younger children far away from the coming storm of violence and political consequences. He knew exactly what this mission would cost, understood it might fail spectacularly, and accepted that even if it succeeded, they would all be sentenced to death by the same legal system that had failed to punish Kira. But the way of Bushido didn't leave room for personal safety calculations, family considerations, or cost-benefit analyses about survival. On the 14th night of the 12th month, January 30th, 1703, by the Western calendar that Japan wasn't using yet, they moved through snow-blanketed Edo like ghosts with a purpose. Snow muffled their footsteps and deadened sound, making it the perfect natural ally for men who needed to approach in silence. At exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, when human alertness reaches its lowest ebb, and guards are most likely to be drowsy or distracted, the Ronin split into 2 coordinated teams with military precision. One team would attack the rear gate, while simultaneously the other team struck the front entrance. A coordinated assault that would divide the defenders' attention and prevent organized resistance. The signal would be given when both sides were in position, and then they would move, with the synchronized efficiency of men who had been planning this moment for 674 days. Historians still argue whether the attack was justified under any reasonable interpretation of Bushido or legal precedent, but there's no debate about the tactical planning. It was flawless, thorough, and executed by men who had accepted death as the price of honor. The attack began in complete silence. No war cries, no dramatic charges, no theatrical flourishes that would alert the entire neighborhood. Just coordinated, measured violence beneath a pale winter moon that seemed to be holding its breath. Oishi's front team breached the main gate with a battering ram, crashing through the heavy wooden doors before the guards even understood they were under siege. Meanwhile, the rear team scaled the walls quietly, dispatching sentries with the practiced efficiency of men who had rehearsed this night in their minds 100 times. Kira's household erupted in panic like a disturbed anthill. Guards scrambled in complete disarray, half-dressed, many drunk or asleep, stumbling around in confusion while trying to figure out what was happening and where the danger was coming from. Servants screamed. Lanterns were lit frantically, but far too late to matter. And the Ronin moved through the compound like wolves who had finally cornered their prey after a very long hunt. They didn't kill indiscriminately. That would have been simple murder rather than righteous vengeance. Instead, they shouted clearly that only Kira was their target, and anyone who didn't actively resist would be spared. This wasn't a massacre, but a surgical operation designed to extract one specific man while minimizing unnecessary bloodshed. For all their talk of Bushido and honor codes, this was still blood and steel and smoke in the lungs, swords slipping on icy tiles, and loyalty being carved into reality with sharp edges. The Ronin systematically combed the mansion for their target, but Kira had vanished like smoke. They scoured every room, every hidden corner, every possible hiding place while fighting off guards who were slowly organizing a defense. They interrogated servants with the urgency of men who knew they had limited time before reinforcements arrived or the authorities intervened. Finally, they discovered a secret courtyard behind the main garden, and there, in a storage shed beneath a pile of charcoal and straw, like a terrified animal, was a man in plain robes. His face was pale as winter moonlight, his body shaking with fear, and he absolutely refused to identify himself or speak when questioned. But he bore the distinctive scar that Lord Asano had left on his face nearly 2 years earlier, proof positive that this trembling, cowering figure was indeed Kira Yoshinaka. Oishi, ever the honorable samurai even in this moment of long-awaited vengeance, offered Kira the chance to die with dignity befitting his rank. A tanto dagger was placed respectfully before him. He could commit seppuku like a true samurai, taking responsibility for his actions and dying with whatever honor remained to him. This was more mercy than Kira had shown Lord Asano, more consideration than the legal system had provided. But Kira couldn't do it. He simply stared at the blade with the paralyzed terror of someone who had spent his entire life manipulating others but had never faced real consequences for his actions. The man who had destroyed an entire clan without ever lifting a weapon himself, who had driven a proud lord to desperate violence through calculated humiliation, could not summon the courage to take responsibility when his own time finally arrived. Oishi bowed once with the formal respect due to a man's final moments, then struck with the swift precision of someone ending a long overdue debt. Kira Yoshinaka died, not as the court official he had been, but as what he truly was, a coward who had lived by exploiting others' honor without possessing any himself. The Ronin took his head, wrapped it carefully in white cloth with ceremonial attention to detail, and then did something that would cement their place in legend forever. Instead of fleeing or hiding or attempting to escape the consequences of their actions, they marched calmly through the snow-covered streets of Edo in full armor, carrying their grisly trophy like a religious procession. Historians still argue whether their public march was calculated theater or genuine spiritual devotion, but their destination was never in doubt. Sengakuji Temple, where Lord Asano lay buried, waiting for justice that the law had failed to provide. They carried the severed head through Edo's snowy streets like a sacred relic, walking in formation with the measured dignity of men who had completed a holy mission. At Sengakuji Temple, where Lord Asano was buried, they performed the final act of their elaborate drama. There they cleaned Kira's head with ceremonial care, laid it respectfully before their master's grave, and prayed, not for forgiveness, but for the peaceful rest of a lord whose death had finally been properly answered. Their revenge was complete, their fates sealed, and their names about to become immortal. When morning broke over Edo, the city awoke to news that seemed impossible. Kira Yoshinaka was dead, slain in the heart of the supposedly secure capital by 47 Ronin who had not fled, not hidden, but walked in dignified formation to a temple where they now knelt in prayer, waiting calmly for whatever consequences their actions would bring. Word spread through the city like wildfire, carried by servants, merchants, and early rising citizens who could hardly believe what they were witnessing. The city, usually loud with the clamor of commerce and daily life, fell strangely quiet as people tried to process what had happened. Some called the Ronin heroes who had restored proper order to a world where justice had failed. Others called them criminals who had violated the law and challenged the shogun's authority. But absolutely no one called them cowards. The authorities found themselves in an impossible position that would test the very foundations of Tokugawa governance. The law was absolutely clear. Revenge killings were illegal, samurai were not above justice, and challenging the shogun's verdicts was treason. But the public didn't see criminals kneeling at Sengakuji. They saw men who had embodied Bushido to its ultimate conclusion, who had obeyed not the shogun's laws, but the deeper, older law of loyalty that transcended political convenience. If the Ronin were spared, it would encourage more vendettas and undermine the legal system's authority. If they were punished, the people might revolt not with weapons, but with their spirits, losing faith in a government that punished loyalty while protecting corruption. The shogunate deliberated for weeks while the 47 men remained at the temple, tending to Lord Asano's grave with the patience of people who had already accomplished everything they had set out to do. They did not resist arrest, did not beg for mercy, did not attempt to justify their actions to authorities who were struggling to understand how to respond to an act that was simultaneously criminal and heroic. Oishi, the architect of it all, said nothing publicly during this time. He had already spoken through his actions, and those actions had been more eloquent than any words could ever be. Eventually, the decision came down from the highest levels of government. The Ronin would be allowed to die honorably. They would not be executed as common criminals, but ordered to commit seppuku like the samurai they claimed to be, dying with the dignity that their loyalty had earned them. On the morning of February 4th, 1703, each man was handed a tanto dagger and dressed in white robes, the traditional color of purity and death. They bowed to the officials, to each other, and to the memory of Lord Asano, and then, one by one, they performed seppuku with the same precision they had brought to every other aspect of their mission. Even Chikara, Oishi's teenage son, who had fought beside his father, took the blade without hesitation or complaint. Not a single man faltered, pleaded, or attempted to escape the consequences of their choices. Historians still argue whether their deaths represented justice or tragedy, but there's no debate about their impact. They died not in disgrace, but in legend, their bodies buried beside their master at Sengakuji, where the graves remain today. 47 stones in neat rows, covered in incense and offerings from pilgrims who still whisper their names with reverence after 3 centuries. In ancient Egypt, to harm a cat was to flirt with disaster. Not just social embarrassment or mild legal trouble, but genuine catastrophe that could result in mob justice, heavy fines, or worse. This wasn't cultural quirkiness or inexplicable ancient superstition. This was deadly serious religious law that governed every aspect of Egyptian society. Cats weren't pets in any modern sense. They were living embodiments of the divine, untouchable representatives of the gods walking among mortals, and absolutely not to be trifled with under any circumstances. When a family cat died from natural causes, Egyptians would shave their eyebrows in grief, not as a fashion statement or symbolic gesture, but as a ritual requirement that demonstrated proper respect for a sacred being's departure from the world. This wasn't optional mourning. This was mandatory spiritual protocol that could have social and legal consequences if ignored or performed incorrectly. The reverence was rooted in religious reality rather than simple animal affection. The goddess Bastet, daughter of Ra the sun god, was the feline deity of home, fertility, music, and protection. Essentially everything that made life worth living in the ancient world. She had begun her divine career as Sekhmet, a lioness goddess who was fierce, destructive, and absolutely terrifying in her righteous fury against the enemies of order and justice. But over centuries, as Egyptian society evolved from conquest and warfare toward prosperity and domestic stability, Sekhmet transformed into Bastet, retaining all her divine power and protective abilities, but gaining the grace, wisdom, and approachable beauty of a house cat, rather than a man-eating lioness. Her temples were filled with offerings of jewelry, perfumes, fine foods, and most importantly, cats. Real ones, living and breathing representatives of the goddess who roamed freely through sacred spaces. These temple cats were fed by priests with the same care devoted to human nobility, treated as manifestations of Bastet herself, rather than ordinary animals. Archaeologists have uncovered vast cat cemeteries near Bastet's main temple in Bubastis. Thousands upon thousands of mummified cats, wrapped with the same careful attention to detail as human pharaohs, preserved with expensive resins and perfumes for their journey to the afterlife. This wasn't a novelty or occasional practice. This was a massive religious industry where cats were bred specifically for sacred purposes, blessed by priests, and sometimes ritually sacrificed so they could serve Bastet in the eternal realm beyond death. The symbolism ran deeper than simple animal worship. Cats hunted snakes, which represented Apep, the eternal enemy of Ra, who threatened to devour the sun each night and plunge the world into chaos. A cat killing a snake wasn't just practical pest control, it was cosmic warfare. A daily reenactment of the fundamental struggle between order and chaos that kept the universe functioning. Cats lounged in sunlight like they were channeling Ra's power directly, patrolled granaries to protect Egypt's food supply, and bore that mysteriously aloof expression that seemed to suggest they knew secrets about existence that humans could only guess at. Historians still argue whether Egyptian cat worship influenced later religious practices in other cultures, but there's no debating the intensity of their devotion. Foreigners, particularly Greek historians like Herodotus, were amazed and perhaps slightly amused by how quickly Egyptian wrath could be triggered if a cat was harmed accidentally. During one famous battle, Persian forces reportedly carried live cats as shields, knowing that Egyptian warriors would hesitate to strike rather than risk injuring sacred animals. To the modern eye, this might seem excessive or irrational, But to the Egyptians, animals weren't beneath humans in some cosmic hierarchy. They were closer to the gods, serving as bridges between the mortal and divine realms. Cats, in their perfect combination of grace, independence, and mysterious wisdom, stood at the most important intersection of all: beauty and the sacred, power and gentleness, the everyday and the eternal. Thomas Jefferson believed in ideas with the fervor of a man who thought philosophy could reshape reality through sheer intellectual force. He imagined himself not as a politician seeking power, but as a thinker whose concepts would outlive any temporary position or worldly achievement. He surrounded himself with books like Other Men Collected Weapons, copied classical architecture into the design of Monticello with the precision of someone building a temple to Enlightenment ideals, and read Virgil, Locke, and Voltaire by candlelight while planning a revolution in human government. His mind wandered far beyond Virginia's plantation boundaries. He once declared, "I cannot live without books," and meant it quite literally, as if knowledge was oxygen and ignorance was suffocation. When he wrote the phrase, "All men are created equal," in the Declaration of Independence, it wasn't political theater or convenient rhetoric designed to rally colonial support. It was a philosophical creed, a sentence meant to echo across centuries and continents, like a bell that would never stop ringing. Liberty, reason, self-governance, these were Jefferson's religion, more sacred to him than any traditional theology. He imagined a world where monarchs would crumble under the weight of their own obsolescence, where free-thinking farmers would till soil they owned while governing themselves, and where education would triumph over superstition like sunlight dispelling shadows. His vision was beautiful, inspiring, and tragically incomplete. The problem was never his ideals. The problem was who got to be included in their magnificent scope. Even as he preached liberty with genuine passion, Jefferson owned more than 600 enslaved people over his lifetime, human beings whose labor built his dream of freedom while they themselves remained in chains. He knew this system was morally wrong, wrote extensively against slavery, called it a moral depravity and a hideous blot on American civilization that poisoned both enslaved and enslaver. He even proposed gradual emancipation in some of his earlier political writings, demonstrating that he understood the contradiction intellectually. But when it came time to act decisively, to free the people who lived and worked at Monticello, to transform his philosophical opposition into practical liberation, he hesitated with the paralysis of someone caught between principle and convenience. Most of the enslaved people he owned, he never freed. Some he sold when financial pressures mounted. Others, like Sally Hemings, were held in an even more complicated and morally devastating captivity that blurred the lines between exploitation and something that could never be called consensual given the absolute power imbalance involved. To Jefferson, liberty was an ideal to pursue intellectually and politically, but only within the carefully defined circle of white men with property. That was the universe he truly imagined when he dreamed of abolishing aristocracy and creating democratic equality. He kept the fundamental structure of racial hierarchy intact, while dismantling only the parts that inconvenienced people who looked like him. Historians still argue whether Jefferson was a hypocrite, a product of his time, or simply a brilliant man with moral blind spots large enough to swallow entire generations of human suffering. Whatever the answer, one truth remains uncomfortably clear. The man who championed the natural rights of humankind did so from the porch of a plantation, overlooking fields tilled by the very people his pen had systematically forgotten or deliberately excluded. That paradox would haunt every word he wrote, every speech he gave, and every political victory he achieved. His ideas about freedom would help ignite revolutions across continents and inspire liberation movements for centuries, but they would do so while carrying the stain of their creator's inability to extend that freedom to everyone who desperately needed it. Jefferson was a philosopher of liberty, who lived a life fenced in by chains of his own making, and he never found a way to break them. When Thomas Jefferson took the presidential oath in 1801, he called it the Revolution of 1800. Peaceful, bloodless, and purely ideological, a moment when political power transferred from one philosophical faction to another, without violence or constitutional crisis. After the bitter partisan warfare that had defined American politics in its first decade, a sitting president had voluntarily handed authority to his political rival, a transfer of power almost unheard of in an age when most governments changed hands through conquest, inheritance, or assassination. Jefferson, the man who loathed ceremony and aristocratic pretension, walked to his inauguration in plain clothes, no horse-drawn carriage, no powdered wig theatrics, no royal pageantry, just a tall, lanky philosopher dressed like an ordinary citizen approaching the most powerful office in the young republic. He claimed to want a minimalist presidency with smaller government, lower taxes, reduced military spending, and less federal interference in citizens' lives. And yet his time in office would fundamentally redefine the very shape and character of the United States in ways that contradicted almost everything he had claimed to believe about limited government and strict constitutional interpretation. The most famous and consequential act of Jefferson's presidency came in 1803, the Louisiana Purchase, a real estate transaction that doubled the size of the young republic for the bargain price of $15 million paid to Napoleon Bonaparte, who needed cash more than he needed a North American empire. For that modest sum, Jefferson acquired more than 800,000 square miles of raw possibility, stretching from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. Easily one of the most consequential real estate deals in human history, and one that went against everything Jefferson had previously argued about federal power and constitutional authority. Nowhere in the Constitution did it explicitly say the federal government could purchase new territory from foreign powers. Jefferson knew this, understood the constitutional problem perfectly, and even considered proposing a constitutional amendment to legalize the transaction retroactively. Then he quietly dropped that idea and proceeded anyway, justifying the act with typical Jeffersonian philosophical grace. Necessity had overridden constitutional orthodoxy, and idealism had once again bowed to practical opportunity. Jefferson had always dreamed of an empire of liberty, a nation of yeoman farmers spreading across vast landscapes, rooted in independence and virtue rather than crowded into corrupted cities. But expansion carried consequences that his idealistic vision couldn't easily accommodate. What about the Native American tribes who already lived throughout the Louisiana Territory? Would slavery spread westward into these new lands? Could the federal government effectively govern such an immense domain without becoming the kind of centralized authority Jefferson had always opposed? He dispatched Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to explore the new frontier, hoping they would discover a water route to the Pacific and catalog the region's natural wonders. But his private correspondence revealed deeper ambitions. Economic expansion, territorial claims, national destiny, and a growing sense that America was meant to stretch from sea to shining sea, regardless of who might already be living there. Historians still argue whether the Louisiana Purchase represented Jefferson's greatest triumph or his most significant betrayal of his own principles, but there's no debate about its transformative impact. For a man who claimed to prefer retreating to his garden over wielding political power, Jefferson as president had turned the republic into a continental empire almost overnight. The seeds he planted with that decision would eventually grow into manifest destiny, westward expansion, and conflicts over slavery that would tear the nation apart within decades. He had imagined an empire of liberty, but empires have their own logic, their own momentum, and their own moral compromises that even the most philosophical presidents cannot escape through good intentions and elevated rhetoric. Atop a hill in Virginia, Monticello stood as a monument to Enlightenment ideals made manifest in brick and mortar. Symmetry, reason, classical beauty, and human perfectibility, all expressed through neoclassical architecture that Jefferson had designed himself with obsessive attention to detail. It was filled with books, scientific instruments, inventions, and references to ancient Greece and Rome, a physical embodiment of everything Jefferson believed about human potential and rational progress. But behind the architectural elegance and intellectual sophistication lay a darker, more complicated truth that Jefferson could never reconcile with his public philosophy. Monticello was also a plantation, powered entirely by the labor of enslaved people who lived, worked, and died there without compensation, recognition, or freedom. At any given time, more than 100 enslaved men, women, and children tended the fields, made the bricks, cooked the meals, and maintained the very house that Jefferson called his sanctuary of liberty. Without their forced labor, Monticello could not have existed as Jefferson envisioned it. His lifestyle, his intellectual pursuits, his political career, and his architectural dreams all depended fundamentally on a system of human bondage that he knew was morally indefensible. This wasn't ignorance or cultural blindness. This was the daily, grinding contradiction at the heart of Jefferson's existence. He kept detailed records of the enslaved people at Monticello with the same methodical precision he applied to scientific observations, listing them by name, age, skills, and estimated monetary value. He referred to them in his private correspondence as assets and property, while simultaneously writing passionate denunciations of slavery as a system that corrupted both the enslaved and the enslaver. He called it a moral depravity and a hideous blot on American civilization, yet he freed almost none of the people he owned. Over 600 human beings passed through his ownership during his lifetime, and fewer than 10 were ever granted their freedom. Some of this reluctance was financial. Jefferson was deeply in debt for most of his adult life, and his enslaved workforce represented collateral that his creditors expected to remain intact. But much of it was simply inertia, the inability or unwillingness to dismantle a system that sustained his wealth, comfort, and intellectual pursuits. And then there was Sally Hemings, an enslaved woman at Monticello, whose relationship with Jefferson remains one of the most discussed and deeply uncomfortable aspects of his life. Evidence now overwhelmingly supports that she bore at least 6 of Jefferson's children, a relationship that modern DNA analysis and historical scholarship have confirmed, despite centuries of denial and cover-up by Jefferson's defenders. Hemings was also the half-sister of Jefferson's deceased wife Martha, the product of Martha's father's relationship with an enslaved woman, representing generations of slavery's entanglement with rape, coercion, and the blurred bloodlines that plantation life created. The relationship between Jefferson and Hemings could never have involved genuine consent, given the absolute power imbalance between a white master and an enslaved woman who had no legal rights, no ability to refuse, and no protection under law. Their children were born into bondage, though Jefferson later freed some of them during his lifetime, and others through his will. Historians still argue whether this relationship represented affection, exploitation, or something more complex that defies easy categorization. But the fundamental reality remains unchanged. It occurred within a system where one person owned another human being completely. Monticello wasn't just Jefferson's home. It was a mirror reflecting the hypocrisy, rationalization, and moral compartmentalization that allowed a man of elevated ideals to live comfortably within a system of oppression. Jefferson, ever the philosopher, never solved this contradiction intellectually or practically. He simply lived with it, day after day, year after year, surrounded by the beauty he had created and the suffering that had made it possible. Historians still argue whether Jefferson should be judged by the standards of his time or our own, but Monticello itself provides the answer. It stands today as both monument and accusation, beautiful and terrible, inspiring and damning. On the morning of July 4th, 1826, Thomas Jefferson lay in his bed at Monticello, too weak to rise, too proud to complain about the slow dissolution that had been claiming him for months. He was 83 years old, frail as autumn leaves, deeply in debt despite a lifetime of public service, and drifting in and out of consciousness while the nation he had helped create celebrated its 50th anniversary with fireworks, parades, and patriotic speeches that echoed his own words back across half a century. His family had gathered quietly around his bedside, understanding that this Independence Day would mark not just the nation's milestone, but the end of an era. Outside Monticello, America was celebrating with the enthusiasm of a young country that had survived its dangerous infancy and grown into something resembling the republic Jefferson had imagined in his most optimistic moments, though it still carried the contradictions he had never resolved. Jefferson had always been fascinated by timing, by the symbolic weight of dates, and the way history seemed to arrange itself into patterns that suggested deeper meaning beneath surface events. Now, as his own life approached its conclusion, history was conspiring to create one final, impossible coincidence that would cement his legacy in ways no speechwriter could have planned. According to those present at his deathbed, Jefferson stirred slightly in his final hours and asked one last question with the curiosity that had driven his entire intellectual life. Is it the 4th? When told that it was indeed July 4th, 1826, he closed his eyes with what witnesses described as satisfaction, as if he had been waiting for this particular moment to release his hold on a life that had been devoted to the idea of American independence. He died just after noon, but the story doesn't end with his final breath. Hundreds of miles away in Quincy, Massachusetts, John Adams, Jefferson's old friend, political enemy, and friend again, was also dying on this same extraordinary day. The two men had not only rekindled their correspondence after years of bitter political rivalry, but they had somehow synchronized their departures from a world they had helped reshape. Adams, slipping in and out of lucidity in his own final hours, reportedly uttered his last words without knowing that Jefferson had already passed. Thomas Jefferson survives. He didn't realize that Jefferson had died just 5 hours earlier, creating a coincidence so poetic that even fiction writers would hesitate to include it in their stories for fear of seeming heavy-handed. Two of America's founding fathers, two presidents, two primary authors of the Declaration of Independence, both dying on the same day, July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the nation they had helped forge through words, politics, and sheer stubborn determination. It was too symbolic to believe, too perfect to be accidental, and yet entirely true. News of their twin deaths spread across the country like wildfire, carried by writers, newspapers, and word of mouth that transformed mourning into something approaching awe. People interpreted the timing as divine providence, as if the founders had somehow waited to ensure the Republic could survive for half a century before letting go of their watchful protection. Jefferson was buried on his beloved mountaintop beneath a plain obelisk that he had designed himself with characteristic attention to detail and philosophical precision. The inscription, at his explicit request, did not mention his presidency or any political offices. Instead, it read simply, "Author of the Declaration of American Independence, of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, and father of the University of Virginia." He had chosen to be remembered not for the power he had wielded, but for the ideas he had contributed to human civilization. Even in death, Jefferson wanted his legacy to rest on principles rather than politics, on concepts that might outlive any particular government or generation. The years pass like turning pages, and Jefferson's legacy grows more complex with each generation that examines his life and contradictions. His words about equality and liberty continue to inspire liberation movements worldwide, while his ownership of enslaved people serves as a permanent reminder that even great ideas can coexist with terrible practices. Monticello still stands telling both stories, the beauty of Enlightenment ideals and the brutality that often funded them. Visitors come from around the world to walk through rooms where philosophy was written by candlelight and to see the quarters where enslaved families lived and worked. They leave with questions rather than simple answers, understanding that heroes and hypocrites can sometimes wear the same face, and that progress often comes through imperfect people, struggling with contradictions they cannot fully resolve. As you drift towards sleep, consider this. Perhaps Jefferson's greatest gift to posterity wasn't his perfection, but his complexity. The reminder that human beings are capable of both transcendent ideals and devastating failures, sometimes simultaneously. In our comfortable modern beds, surrounded by freedoms we take for granted, we can appreciate both his contributions and his limitations, knowing that the work of building a more perfect union continues, one imperfect generation at a time. The contradictions remain, carved in marble and written in history, reminding us that even our greatest thinkers were human, flawed, and struggling to bridge the gap between the world as it is and the world as it ought to be. Sweet dreams.